No newsflash here. President Obama's got a whole host of problems, but he's also dealing with backlash, and not from the usual suspects, this time from within his own party. Former CIA director and obviously most recently former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, Jimmy Carter and others, they've blasted the president over his handling of ISIL. And others have had criticisms over his dealings with Congress or lack thereof. We always know the tension overseas, etc. Well, I spoke with Politico's White House editor Dan Berman about this and much more. You know, I caught something the president said when he was in our neck of the woods in Connecticut, saying to the assembled Democratic supporters that they should be optimistic about America, indicating that he had great hopes here, obviously, for the balance of his term. But you see the Panetta book, and there's a long line of critics, including quite a few from the left. You've got basically the party benching him, that they aren't looking for him to stump for him on the campaign trail. Where is the president's head on this, really? I know he's got to say to help raise money here, but does the White House think that they have an agenda that they can really move on even after November?
Well, this is obviously the problem. It's open season on the White House. The Panetta book, is a great example of that. What the White House has done this year and what they're going to have to continue to do is really highlight what the president can do without Congress. These executive orders, these executive actions, putting out regulations, the so-called pen and phone that the president has been talking about. Those are the options that the White House has at this point, and that the White House will continue to have. Because look, regardless of what happens with the Senate, there's still going to be a Republican House, and they have no incentive or desire to negotiate with the White House. So that's where the president's head is at, knowing that his options are limited, knowing that his last 2 years are going to be very difficult. If the Republicans capture the Senate, you're going to see many more attacks from Congress on the president's agenda. The White House will be playing defense, and they know that. Dan,
you mentioned the Senate, and depending seemingly on the day, you get a different idea whether it's going to be a wave election here or because of what's going on in Kansas, or you can pick a few other states. Democrats might retain it. Privately, have you spoken to some folks at the White House? Do they anticipate after that Tuesday in November that they're going to have a House and Senate in Republican control or not?
Look, I think if you gave people truth serum, they would say, they expect a Republican Senate. Obviously, they're kind of not willing to admit that yet. They don't want to be saying, all right, we know that the Democrats are going to lose in Louisiana, or, that this independent campaign in Kansas is going to work out. Mary Landrieu just fired her campaign manager yesterday. That's going to hurt Democrats. Obviously, there are some places like North Carolina where Kay Hagan, the Democrat, has been able to hang on with this lead. So, the map is all over the place.
Yep.
The problem is, and the unifying thing is, that President Obama's approval ratings in all of these states are in the tank. And the Republicans have been able to make these races about Barack Obama, saying, look, if you want to stop Obama, if you're not happy with the president, elect a Republican senator. And, there's nothing that these moderate Democrats in these red-leaning states can do to fight that.
Dan, I'm sure you followed some of, especially the more stinging criticisms in Leon Panetta's book, the former defense secretary, relating to the management style of this president, and particularly with his dealings with Congress. And you walk away from it overall with whether it's a sense of defeatism or he thinks it's a glorified waste of time in dealing with Congress. Covering the beat that you do you think that those within the administration, those closest to the president, also share some of that, or do they think it's a cheap shot across the board that he keeps trying, he's just not finding willing partners?
Well, I think it's part of both. The president clearly, and this has been a constant criticism from day one, hasn't spent that much time kind of glad-handing Congress. D.C. folks, especially members of Congress, especially senators, are used to, being, given the full treatment, being courted, telling them, look, I believe in your core issues.
Yeah, but Dan, it seems that he went past that, Panetta, in that he says he almost has a distaste for Congress and the process. Yeah. That's even more than saying, I don't like to play around a golf with a guy that's not going to do me any good. 4 hours later. This is that he just doesn't like dealing with it.
It's a criticism, you've heard around town from day one, and it's shown that he hasn't courted Congress and that he really doesn't, like dealing with these guys. Look, he's the president. They should have to come to him. And it hasn't really worked. We've seen, he lost the Democratic Senate and House early on, and, he hasn't really built a good relationship with the Republicans. At the same time, the Republicans haven't really been interested in building a good relationship with the president. So there's blame on both sides, but it's not a real secret that the president hasn't really wanted to spend a lot of time courting Congress, and that he has a distaste for it. I think Panetta's book is right on that case. Same time, the White House says, hey, wait a second, Leon Panetta, you've been our guy, you've served with the president. It is a cheap shot once you've left office to come out and say these things.
Dan, you have any sense, maybe out of even self-interest, that the next 2 years may surprise the public in terms of what does get done, whether it be immigration reform, because no party wants to be shut out for the Latino vote in 16. You can argue that they both have some mutual interest in a few other issues. Do you think the public might be surprised, or is it the flip side, which is if you think you've seen gridlock to this point, just wait what the next 24 months look like?
Well, look, nobody's going to lose money by, by underestimating Congress's ability not to do anything. There are some people who would say, look, all right, let's say you get a Republican House and Senate. They'll have to show some willingness to actually get along with the White House, some willingness to lead, because then if they don't, it looks like, wait a second, we elected these guys, and they're not willing to do anything. Now it's time to put Democrats back in charge of Congress. That's definitely a possibility. You're going to see national Republicans say, we need to do something on immigration because they're really scared of what happened to Mitt Romney, where the Hispanic vote went so much for the Democrats that it hurt his overall chances. At the same time, what we've seen is the national Republicans and the House Republicans are really two different groups. So many House Republicans represent districts that don't have many Hispanic voters. They represent voters, especially their primary voters, that oppose immigration reform, that oppose doing anything on the border besides adding more agents and building more fences. So again, you have kind of that constituency versus the folks running for president who might be worried about that overall picture. That's not an easy divide to solve. So the idea that enough of them will suddenly get religion and say, let's do something on immigration to help our general election chances in 2016, I think that's a bit of a reach.
And on that optimistic note, Dan, thank you very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it. We'll be talking to you, I have a feeling, quite a bit here between now and the election. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you.
All right, when we come back, we're going to head closer to home here. We had a conversation with Bob Antonacci. Bob is running for the state controller's office in New York. That conversation straight ahead.